Alright.
So the last wire on the top on this side, it's green, according to the switch box. It actually looks kind of blue, but I could see remnants of green color here. So I guess this wire used to be green at one point in its life. So this thick green wire comes out and goes down and wraps around this thick black wire, which is screwed right here for a ground. These are the two input wires to the ignition coil down below. And so I'm going to leave those on because my plan is I'm going to try and take this front plate off, which will, if I can successfully get that off, then I'll end up with the ignition coil, the rectifier, and the switch box all on a plate that they're all commonly grounded to. And it'll make my bench testing a lot easier. So then there's this wire here that goes to the plug that I haven't disconnected yet. This one, another case of goodness knows what color that used to be. If I come down here, looks like this might have been a gray wire. No, I can't really tell. Alright, this wire comes up, sneaks behind this wire, comes up here, here's a strain relief, and then it comes up top here and is cut off. So, of course, the question would be, what is this wire? I think this is the electric choke. Looking in here, I could see there are these plastic butterflies. There's 3 carbs in here, 2 for each cylinder, but only the top 2 carburetors have these choke butterflies. My theory is that what goes on here is that by choking the 4 out of the 6 cylinders, that's enough for starting purposes, and then they'll worry about those other cylinders warming up and leaning out when they need to. But so we got this choke, okay, and right here there's this metal cylinder that's just hanging here, and it's got a little cable attached to it that goes to that mechanism. Now there's a hole right here in this plastic piece right here that goes nowhere. I'd be willing to bet if there's a manual choke linkage on this thing somewhere, that maybe that's that. Well, hold on a second. So my theory was that on the top piece that's been removed, that somewhere there's a electric choke solenoid, and that this went into the choke solenoid, and what would happen is when you energize the choke solenoid, it would pull this up, and it would choke it, and that you would have a button up on the dash, maybe a spring-loaded or a momentary switch that you would just hold while starting, and then once the engine fired, you would release it, and it would allow this to open back up. I don't know, though. Because now I just noticed right here, next to this, there is what looks to almost be like a switch you pull up. Right here on the top. Look at this up here on the top. You got this plunger right here you can pull up on. Well, that's not mechanically connected to anything, but what's on the bottom of that is a screw right here. The remnants of a wire. So it's conceivable that this went right here. But what the heck's that do? The act of pulling this up really doesn't do anything. Or does it? That's going to be a mystery. But I can take this wire off. Well, at the very least I can. Let me cut it out of the way, because I don't know what the hell it is. I just don't want it hanging and the bare wires touching anything over here. Let's see if we can't figure out which pin that wire went to. That's this one over here. It's a small pin that's all the way over to the farthest over to the left. It's the one that was a little bent apart, but I bent it back together. So my guess is I still think that's electric choke, but I'm not sure exactly how that's supposed to work. Alright, so all that leaves as far as wiring going to the main plug is this big heavy starter wire, which we already talked about. That goes right here. This, interestingly enough, this red boot this plastic boot or rubber boot right here is actually supposed to be covering this. Look how this was left. Somebody just left that exposed like that. That should have been put on there like that, but it's been that way for so long, it's all deformed, so it's not going to do anything to protect it anyways. So and the last two wires are the two wires to the starter solenoid, so they both go up to the starter up there. And it looks like we got a yellow one and we got a black one. The black one is currently going to the inboard-most post on the solenoid, and the yellow one is currently going to the outboard-most post on the solenoid. And according to, let's see what we got left for pins, unless one of these is common to something else like before, then it's going to be, these are I think the last two pins that we didn't have that were touching anything. So there we go, the top one, small pin immediately to the left of the top large pin. That's the yellow one that goes to the outboard post on the solenoid, and that leaves this pin right here should be the inboard.
Alright, wait a minute. Why am I getting continuity on that? Interesting. Haha, no. Alright.
I'm looking at the resistance of the coil, and the starter solenoid there is kind of messing me up on my continuity check. And it turns out one of these pins, one of these wires here is common to one of the big pins, maybe the ground. So all I have to do is take off one of these, I think. Well, I'll tell you one thing that tells me I don't have an open starter solenoid. Doesn't necessarily mean that it's a good solenoid, but it means it's not open. Okay, so, Alright, so the one that I left hooked up is the black one. So that's common to the lower fat pin, which, yeah, that's also common to the ground. So that's ground. So the inboard starter solenoid post is grounded, and then the outboard one goes to this pin. The one to the immediate left of the large fat pin on top. Alright, now I've come over to this side of the motor to get access to this bolt right here, and there's another one deeper inside there, but I can't get it from the other side because the ignition coil's in the way. So if I take these two bolts out and then unbolt the ignition coil in the front, I think I can get that whole assembly out. Well, this is a pretty long bolt, and it's got a nut on the other side, but they designed this part right here, this section, it's got a cast section that the nut actually sits in that keeps it captive, so you don't even need to put a wrench underneath there to hold it while you're unscrewing it from here. But it is good to know that the nut's there because it's going to fall out on you when you unbolt this. The other thing is that it's kind of a pain to get this out because you can only make a little bit of a turn because of the play that's involved with the nut moving around. You can only make a partial turn before you reach the limit of how far you can go. I might have been able to actually sneak a ratchet head in there and air ratchet head in there and done it that way. That would have been a lot easier maybe, but I didn't want to go through the trouble of hooking up the air hose and turning the compressor on for this one, well, two bolts by the looks of it. Oh, actually that whole unit comes out now without unbolting the ignition coil. The ignition coil bracket does not attach to that. I thought that was actually part of that bracket, but that's a separate piece. Okay, so the next thing I need to do is I need to disconnect that high tension lead coming out of the ignition coil and going to the distributor, so I can take that whole thing out of there. Okay, so I also have to contend with the wires coming out of the distributor. There are 3 wires that come out of the distributor and go over to the switch box. And the good news is the insulation on these 3 wires coming out of the distributor and going to the switch box are in much better shape than all the others, which makes me think that's not the original distributor. Maybe that distributor's been changed. And if that distributor's been changed, I'm hoping it's, it was either a new one or a rebuilt one. That might bode well for my my fear about there being a bad trigger inside that distributor. Maybe somebody already changed that previously. Okay, so I think I'm going to take the ignition coil out with the whole assembly, and that way I can keep it all tied together. So all I need to do on this side is I need to disconnect the wires where the 3 distributor wires actually attach here, and make note of where they go. I can leave this component here. This is a tilt switch. It's more than likely it's a Mercury switch. So that just hooks up to this wire here, goes in here, and then has another wire that goes to a ground. And what that does is, depending on whether or not this switch is tilted enough, it will actually ground this point right here. And I think that must be to kill the ignition if the motor is tilted up and the prop comes out of the water for some reason. That's my guess. Or maybe it kills the motor if the boat flips. I don't know. Hopefully I'll never have to experience why that needs to be on there. And I need to get this high tension wire off. Now it goes into the coil right here, comes out of the coil and goes through a little grommet, and then it goes right to the center of the distributor. Now I'm going to unplug it from the distributor end because I have every reason to believe that it's made to unplug from this end. It may also be able to unplug from the coil itself, but I know that, like on the Johnson motor, that special coil, the lead coming out and the coil are integrals, and they look like they might come apart, but you can't pull it apart, and if you try to, you could damage it. So I'm going to leave that alone. The other little trick they do on these is sometimes they screw these in, that they don't just pull out, that they thread in. No, I think that was just the outer boot coming off. Alright, maybe this does unscrew. Okay, it does pull out on the ignition coil itself. I didn't have to pull very hard for that to come out, and there's a little wire thing at the end there that's indicative of that that's the way it should be. I can't tell if that's arced. That's just dirty. I'm probably going to want to clean that up. I'll just pop this grommet right here out. There we go, then that can stay behind. And then, yeah, I think that does unthread, but I'm going to leave it. I think I'm going to put this boot back up before I forget.
Okay, alright.
Oh, I am going to want to take that off, kind of think of it, because I'm going to use it on the bench to bench test. Oh, I might have an extra one. Alright, and these wires are color-coded, black on the top, gray or white, whatever this light-colored one is in the middle, and brown on the bottom, so I can just take those right off. Alright, so at this point, if I wanted to take this whole assembly right here off with the switch box and the regulator rectifier on it, all I'd have to do is disconnect these 2 wires right here. One's going to this ground on the case, and the other one goes up to this green connection on the switch box, and they both go down as a pair into the ignition coil. Well, since I want to actually test the ignition coil also, I'm going to pull the ignition coil, so I'm going to just leave that connected, pull the ignition coil and take it all over to the benches and assembly. So I see a screw down here, a bolt down here, a bolt down there. That's going to be a tricky one. And then a Phillips head screw, a large one in the back here. If I get all that out, then I'm golden. Well, at first glance, it appeared like that bolt down there was going to be really tough to get to, but it turns out, once I moved this cover that was swinging down out of the way, with a, that's a 7/16 inch nut, and with my 1/4 inch extension, I can get just enough clearance to get that in there. I think I've got it completely unscrewed. I'm just going to reach in here with these needle nose pliers to see if I can't grab it so it doesn't fall down into the abyss. That screw's huge. It actually doesn't come up far enough to clear a boss on the back of the bracket. I guess it's just going to come out with the bracket. So this nut was just turning and turning and turning and not loosening. So I felt underneath there, and sure enough, there's a recess under here, and in it is a nut where the bolt comes all the way through this whole case. So that made me feel on the other side where that other really long bolt goes through, and sure enough there's a recess there too, only the funny thing is I don't feel a nut, and I don't remember feeling one or hearing one drop out when I undid this, so I don't know if it was already missing or not. Alright, so now this is now coming free. Oh, not going to clear the solenoid. That's okay. I'll just pull it out with it. I got this one screw in the front. Big Phillips head. Yep, no, I gotta get the right size screwdriver tip, otherwise I run the risk of stripping that. Well, looks like my battery's dying. Alright, so this bolt goes through a lock washer, then it goes through the coil, then it goes through this spacer, and then it screws down to this part right here. Alright, so now this whole ignition coil assembly should come out. And it does. And then this should come with it. Yeah, and so now this goes to the bench. Ah, now with that whole assembly and the ignition coil and its bracket out of the way, we can uncover all the dirty little secrets. Look at this. What do we have here? Another one of these spacers. I'm thinking that was sitting right on top of here like that, and I didn't even notice it. When I pulled the bolt out, it fell out. And then right here, we've got a nut. Now I know that wasn't my doing, because I didn't take any nuts off up in this area that would fall down in there. And that just fell off. But I think that had a little flake of black paint left on it, maybe. Well, either that or that's more. Well, no, that looks like, okay, that's just more of this, well, that is probably paint. And a leaf. Some other goodies. Alright, gonna have to put those aside with the mystery parts. I'm still wondering about this mystery of this nut. You know, the wiring on that ignition coil is in a lot better shape than the rest of the wiring in this harness. Maybe that's also a newer component. I'm not saying it's not old, I'm just saying that this motor is a relic. Oh, for those of you guys who are wondering, because I actually talked about this motor when I initially, I think it's in my my YouTube welcome to my page video, or whatever they call that thing. I think it's in there. I actually talk about, you know what, I think there is a nut in there. I think it's just stuck in there. I think what I'm going to want to probably do is knock it out now rather than have it fall out later and get lost. Oh no, spoke too soon. What the hell's in there? Yeah, it's in there. There it is. There's just so much crud in there I couldn't get it out. Tempted to just grab the shop vac and go to town and vac this out, which I will probably eventually do, but no, without doing a little bit of poking and prodding first to see if there's any more hardware. Hardware that I find in here is good for two reasons. It's good to find it for two reasons. One, if it's stainless, it's still usable. And stainless hardware is so expensive. Every little nut and bolt you can save helps. And the other reason is, well, every nut and bolt I pull out of here is one less nut and bolt that's going to be rattling around, not supposed to be in there, and end up going somewhere it's not supposed to go.